pathological lying is spectacular in this field.
Welcome to Tom Nelson podcast number 200. My guest today is Dave Collum. And Dave, do you want to tell us a little bit about you and what you're doing here today?
I never know what I'm doing. My name's Dave Collum. I am a podcaster of a higher order at this point in my life. Someone called me the godfather of podcasting. I now have a rule that says one per day. I've already broken it today. And I started podcasting about things about economics. It got more geopolitical, and then it's gotten into other things. And then I think the first time I ever did a full climate change podcast was with you. And as I recall, you were surprised that I'd actually taken it as seriously as I had. And I'm now fully Kool-Aid swilling climate denier of the higher order. But as a scientist, I'd had great faith in the scientific community to try to, work out this pre-pandemic, I should add, right? If you get through the pandemic and you think the scientific community will do their job, you're really on another planet at this point. I'm going to talk about the talk and give the talk, and so it's going to be an odd hybrid. So I, of course, open with the fact that this is a Crichton sort of moment where Time magazine said we were going to have an ice age, and then we're going to have global warming, which is what science can do, right? You can think you're getting an ice age and realize you blew it and change your mind. Now it is up to the global burning or global boiling theme, and somehow global boiling strikes me as a bit hyperbolic. Greta Thunberg promised us, the Queen Greta promised us 5 years ago that 5 years from now that it'll wipe out all of humanity. I would argue, based on what I'm seeing in the United States, she was correct at some level. But I think it's not due to climate change. I think it's due to the 2024 campaign. One of the true nitwits of the climate change story turns out to be John Kerry. Now, when I give talks, I really discourage my students from giving talks with lots of writing, but I'm showing quotes for a very specific reason, and I will be paraphrasing them. So if someone's watching this as a video and you want to read the quote, you get ready to pause it. But I'm going to just paraphrase it by pointing out at some level why the quote is there, and that's how I would do it during the talk too. So here's John Kerry basically saying that to get to 1.5 degrees of global warming, all we need is money. That turns out to be as truthful as he can get, I think. It's all about money. Below that, it shows a picture of four of the bigger clowns' houses, including Gore, Obama, Kerry, and Romney. And you'll notice there are no solar panels on them, which suggests that maybe they forgot to practice what they preach. Here is a statement by Ottmar Edenhofer, who is an IPCC official, stating that that the climate policy is really about redistributing the world's wealth. So I'd say that he's probably being pretty factual there too. What I'd like to point out here, and this is something that drives me pretty crazy when I'm having a debate with people, is that they smuggle in ideas from other subjects as a climate change story. My wife used to do this, and I finally broke her the habit, but there is climate change to be discussed today. There's resource depletion, which I'm a big hawk on. So I think we are consuming the world's resources, but people who say you should address climate change because it'll solve the resource depletion problem, I said, no. If you want to solve resource depletion, focus on resource depletion. Don't focus. So you won't solve the problem if you don't define it clearly. There's the pollution argument, which I think here is pretty self-correcting, as shown by the Deepwater Horizon when we thought we opened the gates of hell in the Gulf of Mexico. And a couple of years later, we're okay. So the world does self-cleanse. But again, you're also smuggling in another story altogether, because if pollution was the problem, they'd say, well, we should be using natural gas. And the climate change crowd refuses to accept that. Overpopulation gets at all of the issues, all of the above, and again, but don't make climate change arguments when you want to talk about the world being overpopulated with people. And then lastly, there is what is referred to as the $150 trillion opportunity, which is a phrase that Goldman Sachs came up with. And we know that their job is to make money. And so that probably is really getting at the heart of the matter once again. This is really the start of it. I have an email trail that I've gone through and my growth, my entry to the climate change world. And so this was an email to my brother in which I pointed out that he challenged me. Two guys challenged me, him and a guy named David Walker, were poking at me saying, how do you know it's true? And as a scientist, I had faith in science. And so here's an email that I wrote to my brother where I'd had dinner with the former Secretary of Energy, Stephen Chu. And he said there are no credible scientists who doubt the global warming, none, right? And so that was me, using the pushback against the, only an idiot would believe the denial model. It shows a picture of a globe and there's red all over it. And I'm going to remind the listeners that I could make that globe any color I wanted. And so when someone uses a lot of red, you should be aware of the fact that that is just a computer setting on their screen. It looks really bad if you make it bright red, but it doesn't mean it is. Here's a great quote from Marcia McNutt, the editor of Science, saying the debate has ended, the science is settled, even a political opinion is not. Marcia Nutt is a moron. She is obviously knows nothing about how science works, and she obviously is unaware of sort of the impact that Einstein had on Newtonian physics when they thought they'd resolved that problem. And then there's the famous 97% of climate scientists think climate change is a crisis. And as you know, Tom, that comes from a bizarre survey of papers in which they looked at just the abstracts and threw away something like all but 0.4%, according to Crichton. So they sifted through it. They found only those papers in climate science in which they made an explicit statement in the abstract, which narrowed it down from thousands to 79 papers. And as Crichton put it, they took 0.4% of the sample and turned it into a 97% number. Of those four that made an explicit statement in the abstract, 77 of them said it was a crisis, and they said, and from that point on, now, climate scientists, I presume, know that this is a farce, and therefore the ones who cite this number, we all know, are liars. And so, when I will challenge anyone who uses that number, and I'll say, it. I watched the debate once afterwards. I went after the guy. I didn't do it in public. I said, you're lying when you quoted that number. And he was doing this hemming and hawing shit on me like there was no tomorrow. But it's appalling. So that number is bullshit. We know that. Classic photo. Here's Will Happer, one of your favorites, as I'm well aware of, not only a physicist at Princeton, director of Department of Energy's Office of Science, advisor to many presidents, saying, by the way, CO2 is really good for life on Earth. Happer also claims to have been the first person to actually write a book about the influence of greenhouse gases on climate. He said that in one of his talks. I didn't know that. Happer is really good about pointing out the physics of greenhouse gases and pointing out it's very nonlinear, and that by adding more CO2, that there's this terrible law of diminishing returns, and it does not increase the risk of greenhouse gas-based global warming. But as this picture points out, that we will get a lot of nice growth of our green materials if we have more CO2 in the atmosphere. Of course, Will Happer's just an old white guy, so he's dismissible. Here's the one. Fairly recently, I saw Thomas Sowell, who's a bit of a recluse because he likes to write books and he can't if he's being pestered, but he's one of the great economists of the 20th century. And he actually, when asked about climate change, drew without showing it, he drew attention to this picture and said, until you can explain this, that debate's stupid. And so this is a quote from Richard Lindzen. He points out that it's one of the greatest mass delusions in history. So the idea that there are no credible scientists who don't believe the narrative. Well, I've already found a couple so far in this talk, and we'll keep hitting them. This particular plot's an interesting one because it shows what is an undeniable correlation of CO2 and temperature, Earth's temperature. And so this is often showcased by the climate climate catastrophists is showing. How can you refute this? What an amazing correlation. And it is. The problem is, as you know, there's an 800-year offset that's statistically significant. And the offset is that the temperature rises 800 years before the CO2 rises. And so the causality is, as used by the catastrophists, is causally backwards. And it turns out it makes sense. The temperature rises, the oceans degas, which is freshman chemistry. And so as the world gets hotter, then the CO2 comes out of the oceans and goes in the atmosphere and shows up in Greenland ice cores and things like that. So the fact is, warming causes CO2, not vice versa. That's kind of entertaining. Any idiot can see that the days are getting hotter. And here's a plot of, I have to squint, but it's about 25 years of global mean temperature. And as you can see, it's flatter than a pancake. Now, what I like to draw people's attention to, especially the people who have thoughtlessly not even wondered about this topic, I said, so let's say climate change is roaring along. Let's say it is a problem and it's rising, some fraction of a degree per year to get to this awful 4-degree rise at the end of the century. Do you really think that you can see that? And it would be the equivalent of me looking out the window and say, of course those trees are growing. Look, it's obvious those trees are growing. And you go, it's not obvious to me because, I looked at them last year and they kind of look the same. So if you think that you walk outside and you develop a serious sweat because it's August and it's 98 degrees, that you're detecting 1/10 of a degree from the previous year, then you really have to get a CT scan. That's a recurring theme. Everyone says, the flooding, to this, to that. Even if it's roaring along, the naked eye can't detect it. Very sophisticated scientific measurement is the only way to detect it. But so the idiots, they can see it though. They can say, it's hot. This winter was warm. Of course it's climate change. The winter's way warmer. And you go, well, good luck with that one. The global mean temperatures before 1980 are based on untrustworthy data that I think you and I probably agree on. That it shows here a growth. Now, if you squint at the very top of this plot, you can actually see the flatness up there. But if you pan back and say, that looks pretty good. But the problem is, the temperature measurements prior to 1980 are baloney due to base effects and all, and what's the heat island effects and as your audience already knows, you put a thermometer out somewhere, admittedly a thermometer from 100 years ago, so heaven only knows how it correlates with today. And you put it out somewhere in the middle of nowhere, and now it's in the middle of a shopping center. Because it hasn't been moved, you are going to get an erroneous reading. And so this guy, who happens to be an oceanographer in Hawaii, a physicist in Hawaii, says you can't believe anything prior to 1980. Here's 100 years of recorded highs in February. Now it turns out to be February 12th. So someone picked an arbitrary day, but over a century, you can see that the high on February 12th for 100 years is going down, not up. And if there was a trend, you would expect to see it here, especially because this is sort of a single point reading. So you're not averaging a lot of stuff. This is across the country, but it's not a bad depiction of what's really happening. Here's a plot. I'd like to find a better one of this plot, showing many, many years, but you see the Earth just gets warmer and colder over many, many years. I love this headline: vintners in France haven't seen such a succession of hot weather and dry harvest since the 14th century. Oh my God, that's awful. I would like to rewrite that headline a little bit. It says, and say it was this goddamn hot in the 14th century. And that's what you know is the medieval warming period. Now, here's where it gets really tricky. And again, Happer's mentioned this. This has been known for many decades that the Middle Ages were warmer than the world now. And so the climate narrative almost gets destroyed by that one fact alone. the climate narrative architects have been working overtime to decrease the temperature of the medieval period. And Happer points this out. He said, slowly but surely, they've been knocking down the temperature of the medieval period to get it such that that's no longer as embarrassing. So there might be modern plots that have somehow removed the medieval warming period. We'll see this again. The pathological lying is spectacular in this field. Here's Patrick Frank, physicist at Stanford University, says that anthropogenic, meaning human-based air temperature, cannot have been nor presently be evidenced in climate observables. And as I recall, that's the same guy who did the statistical analysis and said the error bar is 5 times bigger than the measurement, just using error propagation arguments. I think he's in the synchrotron at Stanford. And there's some failed models that shows what they predicted and actually what happened, and you can see they didn't work. But I can forgive stuff like that. If they were trying to get it right, you will still see stuff like that. So here's the IPCC report that says that basically the climate system is an extraordinary complex nonlinear system, and therefore long-term predictions are not possible. That was in 2001. That has subsequently somehow disappeared from that report. That was starting to get embarrassing, and even though it was 2001, so in 2001 we were still painting our hands on cave walls. So that should throw away somehow. And then here's Steve Koonin saying that the media's portrayal of what's going on is so out of touch that it's absurd and demonstrably false, right? Now, who's Steve Koonin? Well, Steve Koonin is a former Caltech physicist, former provost of Caltech, and he chaired the American Physical Society's committee of elite physicists they put together to address this question, say, is climate change real? And so they put 12 real rock stars together. I bet you Happer was on the committee, although I haven't gone to the trouble of proving it. But Freeman Dyson was on it. There were some big names there. And they came out of there all deniers. That was a committee of 12 who said this stuff is total bullshit. And now they're just all white men. We're back to that story. Then you get Michael Mann. Michael Mann is at Penn State. I know someone who knows him who has nothing good to say about him. Here is a quote by one of his co-authors on a paper in which he says, better that nothing appear than something acceptable to us. Excuse me while I puke. So Michael Mann was at the center of what is referred to as ClimateGate. And it was where there were emails that got leaked that showed that they were just making shit up. It turns out Mark Stein got sued for calling him out in various ways. And unfortunately, in the court of popular opinion, which sometimes leaks into the courts, Mike Stein lost that case, even though scientists look and say to lose the case, they had to demonstrably prove that Mann was right or wrong, and no one was qualified to do so. So it was just a disagreement. Stein, on the other hand, who's a colorful character, certainly didn't mince words every chance he got to make Mann look like an idiot. So this is the famous hockey stick that made Mann famous, that helped get Al Gore the Nobel Prize, and turns out to be questioned by his collaborators. Here's another physicist at Oxford. Oxford, I'm told, is an important institution. Do I expect you to publicly denounce the hockey stick as obvious drivel? Well, yes. Right. So the serious players are out there going, Michael, you're full of shit. Here's a climate scientist at Edinburgh. Did Mann get it all? Mann et al. Get it wrong? Yes, Mann et al. Got it all wrong. Right. And so there really are. Now, here's what's really interesting. Michael Mann blocked me. I've never said anything to him on Twitter, but I think I'm on a block list. I bet you're blocked by Michael Mann.
Yeah, I am. Mm-hmm.
I think there's a list that goes around. So what's her name? Hayhoe or something? Hayhoe? Yes.
Catherine Hayhoe.
Hayhoe blocked me after I beat her senseless in a minor debate. She decided that blocking me was better than having to face the truth. We'll see that one in a minute. And and she should be able to own me, right? The climate scientists really ought to be able to take me to the cleaners. Here's one from the IPCC on the ocean acidification fraud, which it was only a year or two ago, turned out to have been shown to be baloney. And someone said if such a controversy gets outside the community, it's harmful because the whole community loses credibility. And to them, I'd say, look, you shouldn't worry about that. That ship has sailed. But I'm not sure they'd be satisfied by that. Here's Jimmy Dore saying you have to lie to make your point. You don't have a very good point, which I agree with. Jimmy Dore being up to his ass in controversial stuff now as a comedian. Oh, there it is again. I was working on it yesterday and I duplicated it. Will stop climate scientists told to cover up the fact that the Earth's temperature hasn't risen for the past 15 years. Mail Online, is it a credible headline? I don't know, but it's out there. Here's John Clauser, 2022 Nobel Prize in Physics. Was fairly quiet, is my understanding, before he won it. Is that correct?
I believe that is correct.
Was he off your radar until he won the Nobel Prize?
He was, yep, he was.
And then he shows up and says, you know, dishonest information, breach of dishonesty. We're talking about trillions of dollars. Powerful people don't want to hear that they've made trillion-dollar mistakes. He is a complete climate denier. He was supposed to give a talk at, I think, the World Health Organization or something like that, and they canceled his talk because he denied climate change. And climate activists refer to him as just another old white physicist, which is why I keep referring to these guys as old white physicists with, I should add, Nobel Prizes on their resumes now. And I asked you in the last time we got together, do you know any solar physicists who are climate believers? And you could not come up with one. And I trust you to tell me the honest answer. And I can't either. So the solar physicists are all pointing to that big ball of fusion in the sky going, you know, all that heat we're feeling, that's where it's coming from, that big orange thing up there.
Well, I just found it here. It was Clauser got canceled from an IMF speech.
Okay.
Yeah.
Pretty close. High level. IMF, International Monetary Fund, right? Of course, a climate denier should never talk to the International Monetary Fund. And as I like to be facetious, any idiot can see hurricanes are getting worse. And here's a plot of the global major hurricane frequency since 1980. And I do not need a non-linearly squares fitting program to see that nothing is happening. You say, well, you know, maybe we should pan back a little bit. Okay, here's the continental U.S. landfalls, which maybe I trust our data because maybe the guys in some faraway, godforsaken place aren't counting their hurricanes right, but in the U.S. we ought to be. And here's from 1900 to 2021. And you know, if you wish, you can put a line through it. And I think someone did, and it slopes slightly downward. And so the people who say anyone can see that climate change is a problem, look at all these hurricanes we're having, is using that naked eye model to watch the trees grow and watch the air get hotter and watch the hurricanes get worse. But it turns out not to be true. Or maybe we're too narrowly focused on hurricanes. Maybe we should look at global climate disasters, which includes droughts and things like that. And they're dropping too. So it would appear as though the climate is getting tamer since, in that case, it's since 2000. And, you know, I use sort of random timescales, not because I'm trying to shape the narrative. That's just what I'm fed by Google, right? The coolest plots, you know, I haven't hidden anything. If I find a better plot, I'll show it. And here's Schellenberger, who was an award-winning environmentalist who was called one of the heroes of the environment, and very, very left-leaning. And then he wrote a book saying, "I apologize, I got this climate story completely wrong." And now he's painted as a right-wing MAGA white supremacist because he's gotten up to his ass and things like Twitter files and things like that. But he was a lefty at one point in his life, and he said, he points out that the chance of dying from a bad weather events dropped 99%, which means that if you're worried about climate change causing bad weather events, you probably ought to take a Valium or something, because we have learned to see them coming and say, okay, now it's time to leave the coast because we've got a hurricane coming, and we've got tsunami warning mechanisms and all sorts of things, and so we've gotten very good at coping with the events that sometimes get exacted upon us by climate change and by Mother Nature. Nir Shaviv, smart guy, graduated from college at 18. He's a solar physicist, chairman of Hebrew University, which I'm fairly convinced that a physicist at Hebrew University is probably a very smart guy. And he says it's all solar. CO2 has never been shown to be causal. He published that in a Forbes op-ed article that had the life expectancy of a fruit fly. It was pulled down within 4 hours because it was said to not be up to the standards of Forbes journalism, the high standards that give us a financial crisis every 5 years without them noticing. In any event, so you'll find other solar physicists who have trouble with the same story. Here's one from Willie Soon, basically saying that that all the variations lie, basically that nothing lies outside the normal natural variability. Willie is, I find, to be an interesting character. He's sufficiently sort of flamboyant in kind of a goofy way that he may not be the best spokesperson, because you'd like to see a Richard Feynman type. You know, there are people who are not necessarily the best messengers, but he's a smart guy, and now he's privately funded. He moved out of Harvard. Now he's using foundation money to do his research, so he's not constrained by funding agencies and things like that. So, and those are Greenland ice cores showing CO2, and it correlates with solar activity. I like this model. This is a great one. Projected sea level. And the top curve is the IPCC alarmist scientists. The quote here is that all models are parameterized. If I translate parameterized into English, fudged, we force models to include the influence. In some cases, I can't remember the details, but in one case, someone found that you could literally put any data in. You could put in random data, and you would still get the catastrophe showing up in the curve, because if I give you a function ax to the b power and I force b to be 2, it's going to be an exponential function. That top curve in that plot's really interesting. One could imagine that is not a very sophisticated model that produces an upward curvature. That looks like ax to the second power to me. Might be ax to the 1.8 power, but I and all those other ones, they're just, I could draw those by hand, right? They're really, so there's nothing sophisticated there, and the models aren't. They're because they're not sophisticated compared to the climate. This is one of my favorites, actually. Is you can see, if there is any pictorial depiction of climate change that catches people's attention, it's the melting glaciers, right? So 2021, you'll see a glacier. You'll see no glacier. 1921, you'll see there was a glacier. They say, look, the glaciers are melting. It turns out what you find when those glaciers have receded are indigenous artifacts from 1,200 years ago and trees that grew there 1,200 years ago. And so what it tells you is that when those glaciers did not exist 1,200 years ago, there were trees growing, which means therefore 1,200 years ago, it was warmer than it was in 1921, and maybe about the same temperature as today. And so the glacier depictions are stupid. And then here's the Arctic ice will be gone. That was predicted in 1814. I forgive that guy for getting it wrong. He was really working with a very, very small data set, and this is pre-Darwin, right? So he was painting his hands on K-wall. So it was a good guess. He got it wrong. And then there's global Arctic sea ice back to 1879, I think, and it doesn't really look like a big trend there to me somehow. There is no trend in global sea ice. And people think there is. There's not. It says, why is Antarctica sea ice? Here's the Guardian saying, why is Antarctica sea ice at record levels despite global warming? And I go, well, maybe you don't have global warming. Let's start with that possibility. Here's the Guardian saying, oh, wow, what happened in the Arctic in 2023? It's the same magazine. I will not call them a journal, that's for sure. And this was, I think I mentioned this one to you and you had not yet spotted it. And so here's Antarctic sea ice, and it's over the course of a 12-month year. And those are all these colorful lines are previous. It looks like about 40 or 50 years of data. And what's really interesting is out of the blue, 2023 just drops to the floor. And so that caused so much excitement amongst those who are praying for a catastrophe so they don't have to explain themselves to their relatives. And it turns out that if you convert that data to standard deviations, it turns out that drop in 2023 was that's a 6 standard deviation drop, which is round number 1 in a billion. So somehow in 2023, a 1 in a billion event occurred. There must have been some serious CO2 spewed out that year. And then it turns out it gets even more interesting than that. If you look over here to the right, you'll see the month of November, the global sea ice dropped by 6 standard deviations, but then went right back to normal within about a month. So 1 in a billion drop in sea ice all of a sudden turned into normal sea ice a month or two later. And then what happens is when I was looking for different depictions of this data, and this is data, right? As best you can tell, would you call it? It looks like data to me. It doesn't look like a model. When you go boot up if you go to Google and just search this, what you find is a whole bunch of plots that look just like this one, but you'll notice a couple of things. One is that the fine structure is different. So if you look at the little bumps and jiggles, which presumably it's not like there's 20 people putting together the same data. This got to be a single source data set. The bumps and jiggles are changing in the different depictions. And so the fine structure of the data is moving around. And then what you notice is this little variation over here of 1 in a billion, 6 standard deviation disappears in some. And so you go, okay, so someone's fiddling with the data to make it look better. And I haven't seen much about this since then. So it's conceivable they're hiding some fraud. And then I say Fat Tony knows the answer. Now, if you've read Nassim Taleb, you know who Fat Tony is. Fat Tony is the guy who gets asked, here's the narrative. Hey, Tony, some guy named Vinny says, Tony, I flip a coin 30 times, it comes up heads. It's a legitimate coin. I flip it 30 times, comes up heads. What's the odds are going to come up tails on the 31st flip? And Tony says 0. And Vinny says, no, it's 50-50. And Tony says, no, it's 0. And Vinny says, why is that? And he says, the coin's rigged. And Vinny says, no, I told you the coin was legit. And Tony says, you lied. I go, no, here's an almost impossible string of heads. The 10 is said has a 50, but you go, well, the easiest way to explain it is someone lied. And so I think that's what we're seeing in the climate narrative. So you can see the sea level is rising, right? And this data goes back to 1995 or something. Now, again, you look out your back door and you're near the coast, and all of a sudden you've got flooding somewhere, and you go, oh, see, I've never seen flooding like that. Even if it's rising spectacularly by climate change standards, it's rising the thickness of a dime. And if you somehow think that you can look outside and look at some flooded street and say, well, I can now see that because it's been rising the thickness of a dime year after year, it seems unlikely that the naked eye is really letting you see that. So I hate the anecdotal stuff that people say, oh yeah, it's hot today, it must be climate change. And here is back to 1880, and And the sea level has been rising. I think that's probably statistically significant, but it's not something that would cause me to, sell my beach house. By the way, 100 years from now, there will be no beach houses that were built today. And so, to the extent that there are consequences to the coast, we will be washing houses off the beach to the end of time, because you build a house on the beach, at some point, Mother Nature is going to take it back. That we know. And so it's the quote is from the IPCC saying there's robust evidence that of disasters displacing people worldwide, but limited evidence that climate change or sea level rise is the cause. Now, all the headlines that talk about sea level rise and climate change seem to ignore the fact the IPCC said no. The IPCC, as you know, is supposedly the Bible, but it's actually part of it's the Bible, which is supposedly the scientific part, and then part of it's the propaganda wing, which you might call Pravda or something like that. And Pravda is where the headlines come from. This whole idea I stole from Tony Heller, in which he shows this, and he points up here. This is the post-glacial rise in sea level. You can see there have been times in history after the glaciers melted, while they were melting, the sea level really rose many, many meters. And then he points the cursor right up here at the very top, and he says, see that part right there? He says, that's your fault. I got that. Tony's really funny. This is where HAHO, and I got into it. So HAHO is a climate change scientist and activist. I would argue you can't be both. And I would argue that she's the latter. And one day she posted something on Twitter. And it was some documenting a bunch of things happening in the world. And I went through it. And I said, I think there's some fraud in there, Catherine. And she says, why would you say that? If she was not happy. And I said, well, look at figure 26, which turns out to be the one on the left. And I said, I don't really believe you can separate the fires in the southwest of the United States into what fires caused by climate change and fires caused by normal consequences. I just don't believe that. And she says, well, you have to read the original paper. So I went and read the original paper, and it turns out that document had done one little tiny adjustment, and that is over here where it says cumulative fire forest burn, blah, blah, blah. They had taken the word models off that caption, off that y-axis labeling. Now, of course it's a model, but the word model's toxic to the climate change guys because it's easy to say yes, but that's just a model. You put together some differential equations and it gave you an answer, and you publish the paper and you go, yeah, that's cool. I don't know if it's true, but your computer says so it must be interesting. And what you can't separate are things like land management problems, where all of a sudden states will say we can't do controlled burns or whatever. Let's build more houses here or whatever. So that's a preposterous dissection of fires into two. Now, you may notice it starts in 1985 here, right? That's really an important point because fires seem to be rising. If you actually look at U.S. forest area burned since 26. Since 26, huge acreage was burned, and then it died back. Now, if you really squint down in there, around 1980, which I think is about here, if you had cut off the data right here, you could then draw rising fires. But somehow HAHO and her buddies saw fit to decide not to continue it back up here where it would be way up here. If you went back to the turn of the century, they just clipped it off at the most convenient low and followed the trend in the recent years. That is dishonest. Any idiot can see we have serious droughts. This is Lake Mead. And the drying of Lake Mead has serious consequences. There's no question that's true. Because, well, first and foremost, as it dried, we started to discover that the mob was dropping off bodies in Lake Mead, and they were finding barrels with carcasses in them that they thought were comfortably submerged underwater at one point in time. But also, Lake Mead provides power for several major cities in the Southwest, and if the water level gets below the drainage, the input, which also I think, water pressure above it matters. So I imagine it's not draining as well since you don't have 200, 300 feet of water above the drain pipes going to the hydroelectric power plant. At some point it would get below it, and then from that point on you don't get power. And I think Vegas might be one of the cities. And so Vegas has trouble getting water, but they really have a problem. I can't imagine a city hurt more than Vegas if they lost electricity, right? Vegas kind of sells itself on electricity. And so what I like to point out here is that the climate catastrophists, in an effort to mitigate the problem, would all go out and buy electric cars. And right at the point where they can't get electricity, don't get me started on the electric cars. It turns out, as we speak, the electric car market appears to be imploding. And I'll give you a quick synopsis. This is from memory because I didn't intend to put it in. It turns out that people no longer want to rent them. They don't know where they're going to charge them. My brother was at a desk, and the woman asked, how was it when he got one? And he said, I was fine. And she said most people don't want them. And then some other lady was waiting to get a car, and she said, well, where do you charge around here? And the person behind the desk couldn't tell her, but she said, but don't use a Tesla charger. And then she says, and don't charge it over 90%. And the woman said, never mind, I'm out of here. Now, it turns out the electric cars have problems because the battery replacement costs $7,000 to $30,000, and I don't know why it's such a big range, but that is the range. So in the best case scenario, it's like losing a transmission when your battery goes. Now, I don't know about you, but I have a lot of electrical appliances which my battery doesn't function well after about a year, and it gets worse and worse, and pretty soon you can't unplug your phone because you'll power down, and the car's totaled at that point, because it's not worth replacing that battery, especially if the average value is $15,000. Now, what's also true is that the fires have now got the insurance companies paranoid, and they're refusing to insure them. And if you get in a fender bender, supposedly there's no mechanism to determine if the battery has been damaged. It's encased. And you could say, well, there's a crack in the case. Okay. Electric cars that are in accidents supposedly are being written down by insurance companies as totaled. Now, the resale value, for obvious reasons, apparently is absolutely in the basement. No one is buying a used electric car, which means rental fleets can't use them because they need to be able to buy a car in 2024, sell it at the end of 2025, and get a new car for 2026. And if the car in 2025 sells at a third list price, you can't afford to run a rental company off that. You really need to be able to get a good price for that resale. And so, and also, by the way, you've seen these fires. If you happen to be charging your car in your garage and that car lights on fire, your house will burn down. There is no question your house will burn down because those fires are exceedingly hot. They are way worse than any fire. They take 24 hours to put out. Your house is long gone after that car has started to burn. They catch on fire so quickly that if you're in the car when the fire starts, there is a very high probability you do not have time to open the door and get out. You will be flash fried like Hiroshima. And so I'm not buying an electric car. You can if you want. Don't get me started on EVs. California did a funny thing where they passed a law that said you got to have an EVs by some date. The same week that law was passed, they put out a notice saying, please don't charge your cars at night because the grid can't take the pressure. Now, it's at night people are charging their cars, which, by the way, is not the time of day when solar panels and wind turbines are providing energy, which, by the way, they don't work well anyways. And so, so the entire green movement is filled with gigantic potholes. California, they're bitching about their water and their burning problems. It turns out the 20th century was the wettest century in the last 10. So California was built during a wet spell. The entire society of California was built during a wet spell, and it's now regressing to the mean. So now it's turning back into a desert from whence it came. You mentioned the polar bears, or maybe we talked about, I don't know, but any of you can see the biosphere is suffering. Look at that polar bear on the left. I'm in the middle of a podcast with a guy named Chris Irons, QTR, And it all of a sudden clicked. I said, maybe that polar bear on the left has stomach cancer. Maybe he's 45 years old. Maybe he's who knows what. What I do know is I looked up what polar bears can eat, and the answer is anything they want. And so it turns out you go, yeah, but he's obviously sick. And how do you know he has stomach cancer? Well, the polar bear population, according to Susan Crockford, has tripled since the 1970s. So maybe he's starving to death because the population, I think they banned shooting him or something. I don't know. The bear on the right's a grizzly, and he doesn't look very healthy. He looks a little on the thin side. I've scammed you a little bit. That turns out to be Bee's Nose Bear number 409. Bee's Nose Bear number 409 is the reigning champion of the fattest bear in Alaska. That's Bee's Nose at the end of the season. He seems to have solved that starvation problem. He is said to, where he sits on the shore of the creek, they call it his office. But after 22 years of being the fattest bear in Alaska, he finally succumbed to a younger competitor. But so I kind of duped your readers into thinking Bead Nose was sick. No, Bead Nose was just hungry. Here's from one of the world's experts on the Amazon, and an author of the IPCC says these fires were not in the Amazon, were not caused by climate change. The Amazon is not the lungs of the world, which is what it was called. It's bullshit. So, people are starting to call it out. The number of extinct species by decade shows you the biosphere took a beating. Humans really did a number, but it also appears as though we've kind of figured it out. We've said, okay, we really got to pay more attention to the spotted owls and the whooping cranes and things like that. And the whooping cranes are up to about 500 now. So I think we've been able to save them from what was a population of 22. So I think we're figuring out how not to send species into extinction. Oh, there's probably some we have without even knowing it. But we've been doing that for 100,000 years. So Petri Talas, Secretary General of the World Meteorological Association, criticizes the fact that the IPCC documents are read like the Bible. You basically, that this resembles religious extremism. He's the Secretary General of the World Meteorological Organization. That strikes me as of the 97% of people who know climate science, 97% say it's a crisis. Well, we keep finding the 3%. They're pretty easy to identify. That's just an archival list of deniers. Michael Moore made a movie thinking he was going to talk about climate change and discovered he ended up talking about the disasters being caused by alternative energy. So he made the movie. It got blackballed, and etc. There's robust evidence of disasters displacing people worldwide. I think that's been true since the dawn of time, right? The tsunamis do a job for one thing. Limited evidence that climate change or sea level rise is the direct cause. That's from the IPCC. So it's really kind of funny. The IPCC is the Bible of the scientific community. At some level, that might be true. It seems to be kind of an archival document for everything they find. But people who care about the narrative just go cherry pick their way through it and find the parts that they like and just ignore the bulk of it. These are U.S. hazard losses as a percent of U.S. GDP. So we're obviously not being bludgeoned. This is sort of a Bjorn Lomborg kind of an argument that we know how to cope with climate problems. Europe, if you look at people who die from cold versus people who die from heat, it's a 10-to-1 heat to cold ratio, 10-to-1 cold to heat ratio. And so if you want to save lives in Europe, warm the place up, because people are dying from being frozen to death more by a factor of 10. Deaths from natural disasters by decade, not a shock. They've dropped to almost zero because we know how to see them coming and we know how to defend against them. And so if you die from a natural disaster, tornado, that you can imagine, but we even have tornado alerts and stuff. So that even small towns, the alarm goes and you go into the basement and you hide from the tornado. So we really have mastered the art of hiding from Mother Nature. Now, what are the other risks here? There are risks. Here's a great one, says that says that there's a chance that young people are going to get more kidney stones because of dehydration. And I'm looking at this, I'm going, you really have to be kidding. So I live on the lake, and it's probably 4 degrees colder 500 yards up the hill. And so am I going to get kidney stones, but the guys 500 yards up the hill are not going to get kidney stones? Is that the model? Or if I move from New York to Pennsylvania, will I start getting kidney stones because of that? I don't think so. But down at the bottom there says hospitals have opened stone clinics to keep up with increased cases amongst kids. I'm going, oh yeah, I believe that. I wonder if they're federally funded stone clinics that also, have a repurposing capability of using them as, for example, pediatric wards. Underground climate change. I don't know what that is. Maybe that's melting dirt. But it's deforming the ground and beneath the buildings. A study finds. Some of these are really comical. Here's like a quadruple whammy where I say 3 scams collide. Scam number 1 starts with the CDC. Remember, the best way to fight climate change, scam number 1, and support Ukraine, scam number 2, is to keep up to date on your COVID booster, scam number 3, and have a safe Labor Day. Probably not. You'll probably get drunk and crash your car. Why the CDC is talking about climate change, Ukraine, and COVID all in the same announcement is a little on the mysterious side. This one I really love. According to Vladimir Putin, he's talking to Greta, saying, go and explain to developing countries why they should continue living in poverty and not be like Sweden. That's a picture of Greta with some big swingers in the geopolitical world. What's really interesting is there's Greta on a panel talking about coronavirus. So Greta now has become a coronavirus expert. And when I first presented this talk, I was at a finance meeting. In a spontaneous utterance, I said, I am going to start giving talks on vaginal itch, since I am now a world's expert on vaginal itch. And Sanjay Gupta, who you saw got the crap kicked out of him by Joe Rogan, where Joe kept saying, but you lied. And then Sanjay finally admitted he lied. And then the next day went on TV and said he didn't lie. So Greta's gotten into a little trouble. She faked some protest arrests and things like that. And she's sort of getting old, and, she's losing her reason to be. So Greta's trying to find a way to fund her own carbon footprint from this point going forward. There were rumors she was being replaced with a woman named Sophia Chiani at Stanford. I must admit, for me as a male, that's an upgrade. If they want to put Sophia on the front page, I would be okay with that for a while at least. Okay, here's AOC, one of the great intellects of the modern era, saying that the world's going to end in 12 years if we don't address it. Here's Patrick Moore, founder of Greenpeace, calling her a pompous little twit. It says you would bring about mass death. The former founder of Greenpeace, yet another one of the 3%. And here's AOC's handler. This is actually a really interesting one. He's that Indian guy, real smart guy. AOC got elected from a cattle call. I don't know if people know that. So they were looking to primary someone in an election. And they actually put out a cattle call and said, we are looking for someone to run for Congress. And AOC's brother sent in her resume and described why she would be good. They interviewed her and said, okay, we're going to run you for Congress. That's how AOC got the job. So her handler, who is, I'm sure, a smart guy, but has moved on to handle someone new who now needs to be ushered into the halls of power, said it wasn't about climate change at all. It was about how do you change the entire economy thing, he says. So again, he admitted in a moment of clarity that the climate change is not about climate, it's about power. The World Economic Forum classic line now, welcome to 2030, I own nothing, have no privacy, and life has never been better. World Economic Forum. They have a plan for us. Here's Here's sort of a synopsis. CO2 will destroy life as we know it. Apparently not fast enough. Be very careful about people who smuggle in ideas like environmentalism into the climate model, because environmentalism I'm totally behind, and pollution I'm totally against. And the $150 trillion climate opportunity, just if you wrap your brain around how much money is said to be targeted to solve this problem, you understand why people trying to get a piece of that pie are going to play along. Limited resources, I'm totally with. The Great Reset, whatever it is seems to be somehow behind the whole thing. Let's talk about the risks of climate change here. There's some funny stuff in here. Risk means what could happen, not what did happen. And as I like to point out, Russian roulette is statistically a 5-to-1 winner, but you wouldn't say that there was no risk if you pulled the trigger and didn't blow your brains out. So what are your response? Well, you could glue yourself to the road, sit in front of traffic. And I love this meme when you thought you hit a dog, but it was just a climate protester. You could cut back on healthcare. Here's an article suggesting that surgeons use less anesthetic during surgery. That's good. If they do that to me, when I finally wake up, I'm putting a scalpel right into the guy's throat, right into his throat. They say that we should cut down trees. Now your audience has to stay with me on this, because this bit of logic really is nuanced. They say that they've discovered that the CO2 taken in by the trees is not processed as efficiently as we thought. And so they were releasing more CO2 than we thought. So the CO2 taken in, more of it was being released. And as a consequence, the more trees you have, the more CO2 you're releasing. And I'm sitting going, oh my God, how could you come up with something that stupid? And yeah, but no one believes that. Well, here's a bunch of headlines signing up. And there was actually a movement to hire gobs of people to cut down trees and bury them. And I'm going, oh my God. Oh, I just wet myself again. And that's easy now that I just have my prostate out. We can get rid of gas stoves. Banning gas stoves is a great tweet about what unhealthy lungs of a 5-year-old whose parents cook on a gas stove. And you look and you, that's ginger root. I posted that. You would believe the number of people who thought those were lungs. That's fantastic. You could cut back on your holidays. That would be good. That'll ban travel. That means we'll restrict it down to only those with private jets. We could have climate lockdowns. This is Klaus Schwab's daughter, and she's talking about permanent lockdowns now. And I don't know what a permanent climate lockdown is. I think it means we all die, right? I think that means we all just don't get to eat. I don't know, but Klaus Schwab never should have bred. That's all I can say. You can abstain from sex if you cut the birth rate back. I've seen also claims that you should breed with shorter people because they consume less carbon dioxide producing nutrients, at which point out comes the joke about short women with flat heads. And then here's how climate change is ruining your beer. This is a serious problem now. Don't you laugh, Tom. This is getting serious now. You know, even though I don't drink. You can elect a new president. There's the Democrat Republican variants of the CO2 content. Apparently there's a lag that hasn't yet shown up. And then how do you cope with these risks? Well, if there's a tornado, you could mow your lawn. If there's a fire, you could, play the back nine. If there's a hurricane, go surfing, right? These are really good alternatives to curling up in fetal position. And if there's flooding, you have sex. And then I actually saw a friend of mine on CNBC in which they asked him what would happen if there was thermonuclear war. And he just shut up, and his friends talk about that would have an effect on the markets. I go, really? Really? So analysts are warning that an all-out thermonuclear war could be economically disastrous. That's not about climate change, but it shows you how stupid the average hominid is on TV. And there's the $150 climate opportunities, and 97% of climate scientists agree that they don't want to be defunded, and that really says it all. And then I used to get hate mail. I read the comment section of podcasts. It's really funny. There's actually something odd going on here because I'm a pretty popular podcaster, and there'll be these waves of complimentary things saying, "Oh, I really like the part about it." And then all of a sudden, there'll be like 3 or 4 or 5 just hateful comments in a row, and then it goes back to the normal stuff. And I'm going, there's some algo that decided to just throw shitballs at me for no reason. So Jerry was my mad emailer, and he not only used to email me, but he used to email my podcast hosts and say, "You should get this whiny doctrinaire old man off the stage." And here's the Atlantic Monthly, a journalist who said that my take on climate change, I wrote in, again, whatever year it was, the first one was the greatest take on it since Michael Crichton, which was, she's a well-known journalist. So I took that quite complimentary. Now, last post, I'd like to provide a plug. If someone has possibly missed this, what you do is you go look up Konstantin Kaysin, who gave a talk at the Oxford Union on climate change. So if you search Konstantin Kaysin, and there's the link right there, but if you search him on YouTube, Konstantin Kaysin, climate change, you will get that link. And if you haven't listened to it, you have to listen to it, because I transcribed it. And what I realized in the process of transcribing it is all I had to do were add punctuation marks. The guy speaks in perfect sentences. There's no ums. There's nothing wrong with the sentence. The sentences are flawless. I just had to add commas and periods and capital letters. And it's a brilliant explanation. It's sarcastic as hell. I've listened to it probably 3 times. I got to sit down with Konstantin last October. And I said, "Konstantin, when you first dug into the climate change story, how long did it take you to figure out that it was baloney?" He said, "Oh, a couple hours. That's about it. A couple hours." And that's most people. Most people who finally dig in say couple hours, and then you realize that you've been lied to nonstop. And I think I'm not. Oh yeah, and there's I think that's Margaret Thatcher saying that it's an international effort. It provides a marvelous excuse for worldwide supranational socialism, and I actually believe that's the story. I've been reading numerous books on authoritarianism. And I believe that the climate change narrative, besides being a fantastic grift, is about constraining the world's population into behaving themselves in ways that people of great power want to constrain the world's population. So if you want to understand, so your listeners can't possibly have failed to notice that the world's pretty screwed up, right? You look at, raise your hand if you think the 2024 election is going to be uneventful, right? And we're bombing countries that don't make sense. And I think if you want to understand the world, what you do is you go find books on authoritarianism, and all of a sudden you go, "Oh my God, that's what I'm seeing. It's rising authoritarianism." So you start The White Pill by Michael Malice. I like it's a history of the Soviet Union that's exceedingly readable. And we know that Stalin killed 40 million. What we don't know is how, right? 40 million is an unimaginable number. And you go, but did he just like line them up and shoot? No, it's a description of how the Soviet Union as a society completely consumed itself by this rising authoritarianism. And you read Hannah Arendt about the Holocaust. Very difficult read is Hannah Arendt. Edward Bernay's book on propaganda from, I think it's 1926. Matthias Desmet's books are very, very good. And so if you start reading about authoritarianism and propaganda and things like that, you'll all of a sudden say, that is what we are seeing right now. And that's how you will defend yourself against the bad guys. Here's a young man saying farming needs to stop because it's the biggest driver of climate change. So we should stop farming. And And so we could destroy agriculture, and there's some cows in which it was claimed that and this is going on in Northern Europe, and I have no idea how this is happening, but they are destroying agriculture in Northern Europe on this argument. And they've calculated they got to kill 65,000 cows this year to meet the climate goal. It's like, holy cow, you guys are loons. And there's a picture of Ithaca, New York. That's right outside Ithaca. We have something like 200 waterfalls that's higher than Niagara Falls, it turns out. Not as much volume, but they used to film Tarzan movies there back in the pre-talkie days. My grandfather was an extra. I'm thinking, man, it must have taken a lot of shoe polish to make him an extra. And that's Ithaca. Ithaca's a utopian place. That's it, dude.
That was the end of Dave's presentation. What follows is about 35 minutes of discussion that we had both before and after that presentation. I want to point out one fun fact just after your first episode. On YouTube, that episode for me, out of 200 episodes, that one is about number 35 in views. But
that's pretty good.
On Apple Podcasts, that one is by far number one. It's well over twice as popular as my second most.
What kind of numbers are we talking about? I
Well, you can see them. I think you've got, I have to look it up, around 10,000 on YouTube, maybe.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I've had people tell me, sort of why I'm a podcaster. And one of the things I've discovered, there's no topic I don't have an opinion. I literally can only remember one moment in podcast history where someone asked me, and I said, I just have no idea what you're talking about. And so I can kind of fake a conversation on almost any subject at this point and have an opinion, which is, I'm not sure it's a flattering personality trait to have an opinion on every subject. But also I'm a little bit unfiltered, a little bit outspoken. And so, there are people out there who I think are thrilled to hear someone say something they've been thinking. And they go, God damn it, this has been bugging me, right? And so to have someone else say it, I think it means a lot to them. So
I just looked you up on ChatGPT. I don't know if you've done that to look up your own name, but it says you are not shy about expressing contrarian views. I think they got that right.
Yeah, that one, I can see where they scraped that from too. So
okay.
I once had ChatGPT write something about me. I thought it was actually pretty accurate.
Oh, okay. And people are surprised that you're still at Cornell after expressing all these views. You're still there.
It's not easy to fire a tenured faculty, and it's not clear that the university cares about firing me. Once in a while, I've gotten myself into a bit of a scuffle. It doesn't hurt the fact that I have friends in both the level of the trustees and I would say that the provost is a friend. And I have some things that make me harder to fire than your average tenure faculty member too. So there's some embedded stuff that would make me a particularly problematic removal. And so I think they just like it when I don't get into deep trouble. Here's a funny story actually. I posted an article about a tweet about Cornell one night. I was just thinking, and I said something like, Cornell's doing fine. We're okay. I said the president Pollock is okay. It was kind of a faint praise comment. And I said the provost is a rock star. And I said it's a utopian place. We just have to get out of the news cycle because we had been in the news cycle in some very unfortunate ways. And I got a call from my brother-in-law, who happens to be a trustee. There's part of the hint. And he read for me that tweet. I said, Ezra, where the hell did you get it? Now, his name is Ezra Cornell. That's the second hint. My wife is Candace Cornell. She's Ezra Cornell, the original third great granddaughter.
Oh.
And if for some reason that's not enough, my grandfather was president of the National Alumni Association. And what got me into trouble with the angry Philistines is I fought two union movements. And won them almost single-handedly. I mean, I really was standing alone, and we won. And that was at the request of the provost. So it'd be very hard to fire me and sit in court and have to fess up to the fact that all the guff I took was because I, the provost, had asked him to go fight these bastards, right? So that would be kind of an embarrassing thing to have to testify to. And I've got a great funding record, and I've coached 2 collegiate sports, and there's I was a Cornell undergrad. There's just I bleed Cornell red. So I would be a tough fire. I would be particularly problematic. So in any event, so he reads part of this tweet. And I go, Ezra, how did you see that? He said, my boss sent it to me. And I said, Daphne, where did she see that? He said, no, the other boss. I said, what other boss? You're independent. He says, the president of the board of trustees. I go, what? He goes, yeah. He said he sent it to me. And he said, there's hope. And then he said to Ezra, he said, my brother-in-law, he says, is there any chance you actually know this guy? Because Ezra lives in town, so he knows a lot of people. He says, yeah, he's my brother-in-law, which really shocked the chairman of the board. I guess he's chairman of the board. And so he said, well, that's really good to hear, because they're so used to having faculty just scream about how bad their lives are, not noticing that they have a utopian existence by any metric.
That's a very interesting background. I've heard you on many podcasts, and I hadn't heard this part of your background. So
yeah. So again, it would be an ugly court case. And I was actually told by Cornell Legal after I got canceled, very, very big. It was a serious. It made it to the Federalist and places like that. So it was a serious cancellation. I'd heard secondhand. I think the message was actually intended to get to me that Cornell Legal said we'd get destroyed in court if we tried to fire Dave.
Fantastic.
I was on a first name basis with all the guys in Cornell Legal too, because when I fought the unions, I was on speed dial with the Cornell Legal Department. And so, it just would have been funny. So they're just hoping, they're just crossing their fingers that I don't get in trouble. And I stay out of topics like, Palestine, Israel. I don't touch that one. I go deeply into Ukraine. I'm happy to express my views, and they're contrarian. And since I'm ultra loyal to Cornell, I would never do anything to hurt them intentionally. And I think they know that. So
let's talk about what you're going to do here today about speaking out on climate change. Do you think that one is as controversial as some of the other ones at Cornell, for example?
No. And I'll tell you why, because it's about science, right? So you could argue the vaccine was about science, but we're up against a very geopolitical force. And so you could run into a lot of trouble because we're hugely powerful forces that were trying to shut down any comment about the vaccine, which I had strong comments about. But, on Twitter, you couldn't even use the word vaccine. I mean, you'd get kicked off Twitter just if the word vaccine got picked up by the algo. So climate change doesn't trigger that. And if someone wants to debate me on climate change, I'd accept their offer in a heartbeat. So
I would love to see that debate.
And I would actually say, can I bring my friend Tom with me?
I would love that too.
That'd be fun, wouldn't
it? That would be great. I love the work that you've done in your year in review. You've done it at least a couple different times in your year in review, including the most recent one, right? You talked at length about climate change. Right.
I just kind of top it off. I think it was in either 19 or 17. I sort of laid it out. I really went to town on it. And then every year I just say, oh, by the way, here's 15 pages of update, and who's the Nobel Prize winner? What's his name who came out and denounced it?
John Clauser.
Yeah, John Clauser and stuff like that. That's why I take notes, because I can't remember stuff anymore. Yes, and I'll just top it off like, oh, by the way, this year, here are the other funny things that occurred in the climate change argument. Now, I see John Kerry stepping down. Oh, there's real intellectual loss for the climate change community, huh? What did I see? He just said that Russia would be having a better climate. I just saw this morning, that Russia would have a better time in Ukraine if they would simply address their CO2 emission problem. I'm going, yeah, I'm sure Putin's sitting around shitting a brick over CO2 emissions.
That's mind-blowing that he would say that. I don't get it.
Well, I think he's actually an idiot. I mean, I think he's just stupid. I hesitate to do that because, when you say someone's stupid, you then dismiss what they say, and there might be content. But I do think he's dumb.
I think you're right, yeah. So let's talk about this presentation. This is one that you're going to give to your students at Cornell, pretty close to what you're going to do here.
Yeah, so what I'm actually going to do, I'm teaching an undergraduate lab course, I need about 26 lectures. I'm allocated about 42. And so what I'm going to do is, I was going to do it last year and then somehow I didn't get to it. But I'm going to give them a talk on climate change. Now, I throw hints at them about stuff. And I said, look, I'll say something like, look, the vaccine doesn't work very well. And I said, the reason I'm telling you this is because you've all been told it does. And I'm training young scientists, and you don't have to believe me, but what you have to do is start developing a discerning eye and start to recognize that there will be differences of opinions, and that credible scientists will take the other side of some of these debates where it's not working its way through to you through the normal channels. And I said the reason I do that is so that when you see some article on the subject, you might slow down and say, okay, that might not be a nutcase. That might actually be a legitimate story, so I'll read it, right? And so I have all sorts of extra lectures. I don't need them. And so I'm going to do an optional lecture. I feel bad in the sense what I don't want to do is corner students. I say if I don't go, they don't give me a lousy grade. Well, I don't hand out the grades, the TAs do, so that's stupid. But so I don't want to force them to listen to it. But it is science, and it's about scientific process, and it's one of the burning issues of the modern day scientific era. And if COVID somehow finds a way to go away, which is appallingly hard, then they are going to go right back to climate change.
Do you think when students sign up for a class, they know who you are and they know what they're going to get, or are kids still surprised when they get into class and find out what you say to them?
I actually think they're surprised on the positive sense that I think that if you Google me, I'm toxic because of the union fight and the cancellation left just a killing field of bad press, including a lot of real just pathological lying and stuff like that. So what were made as jokes were turned into, oh, no, this is what he believes. Just 2 days ago, someone said I was a known pedophile. I go, yeah, you've been talking to my wife again, haven't you? And so that stuff's out there. And so the grapevine works overtime on a campus. And so the first day of every semester, I actually spend about 10 minutes explaining, and instead of letting it lurk in the background, I just say, here's what happened. And here's why, if you Google evil, you'll see Stalin, Mao, and me, and here's what the backstory is. And then I'll tell them a little bit about, look, I'll probably say something that'll offend you. You could go to the chair, you go to the dean, you go to the president, but they don't care. I said, you could, on the other end, come and talk to me and we could have a lovely chat about what we disagree about. And some get it. By the end of the semester, I'm fine. They start to recognize that I don't have a mean bone in my body, except when it comes to guys like Biden. I'm starting to get some mean bones in my body, and so it seems to go okay. And then at the end of the year, I have a picnic and cook for them on my deck and stuff, and it semes to go okay.
Do you think
they're pleasantly shocked? I think they're pleasantly shocked, and then some are shocked. It's like I've lost my filter in class, so I'll swear. I don't give a shit. Right. And if they want to fire me because I said I don't give a shit in class, or I call someone a douchebag or a dickweed or something, but the students don't care. But all it takes is one. All it takes is one student to care. Next thing you know, there's all sorts of, people have to just get to the bottom of the fact that Dave called someone a dickweed.
Have you seen any sort of dynamic where you speak out on controversial topics and other professors kind of feel safe and they edge into that water too and start speaking their mind? Nothing like that?
No. I did go to a free speech. Here's a funny one. I went to a free speech in the classroom symposium that was sort of organized supposedly by the president. She didn't show up. I thought that was cool. But the provost was there. And they had a panel discussion and stuff, and there were very few scientists. It was like, why would I go to that? Well, I decided I would go to that. What I discovered is that the humanists are more afraid of their students than the scientists. And you go, why would that be? I mean, here's a one-legged black lesbian chick how is she not checked enough boxes to be pretty bulletproof against attack? And the answer is because while I am lecturing to chemists in training and could offend them, they're lecturing to activists in training. And so they're walking on shards of glass. I'm walking on eggshells, which don't seem to bother me. So I don't really walk on eggshells. But so I think all the professors are acutely aware that they could step on a bouncing Betty at any moment for no apparent reason, and trigger a bad event. And I've tried to help a few who did. I've reached out and said, look, here's what's going to happen now. Batten down the hatches, shut your mouth. It'll go away. That sort of thing.
So Will Happer in the climate world has said that since he's older, he feels free to speak his mind. But if he was 30, he would not speak his mind. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not sure I would have had the filter back then, but there's no question that, the climate activists look at the deniers as, they're just a bunch of old white guys. I go, that's because those are the ones who feel safe speaking. And you can say, well, there isn't even old white women. And I go, well, because women weren't in physics to be old white women physicists, right? So they're still young. When Clauser came out and said it, one of the activists said, just another old white guy. And I go, yeah, okay, that pretty much negates the argument by a Nobel Prize winner then, doesn't it? So this isn't even the toughest topic, right? I'm embedded in the transgender debates and sex trafficking and everything else under the sun. So
I think on this topic, there is a lot of shooting fish in a barrel. These completely crazy claims that, it's so easy to debunk a lot of them. Yeah, that's why I enjoy it. Yeah.
It's fun. And some of the claims are so preposterous, you can't help but laugh. You'll see some of those. So as I can't remember if you mentioned this, but I'm going to show you a talk I'm going to give. And at some level, I'm going to give the talk, but at some level, I'm going to talk about the talk because your crowd is so sophisticated. What I will do is generously offer that if anyone wants the PowerPoint slides, I'll happily give them. So all they have to do is email me. Or I can send them to you and you can post them. I don't care.
That's what I do. I put them up on Substack if you're okay with that.
Yeah, that's fine. That's fine.
Okay.
And then people can use them if they want, right? If they say, okay, I'm now going to beat my brain dead nephew over Thanksgiving with these babies, that sort of thing.
Great. I would love to see that.
Yeah, I'll happily pass them along. I'm happy to be the bearer of good news.
Okay.
We're not going to fry. But most of it's meant to be sort of shocking idiocy. Right? It's really, the whole talk is designed to be like, okay, you're told this is how stupid that is, right? So the whole thing is sort of juxtaposition of claims juxtaposed on sanity.
Perfect. Do you have any thoughts in the big picture about where this is going, about how much longer is the general public going to stick with this before they revolt and they're going to have none of it?
This one's going to be tough to stop because it's easy to sell an idea in which you say, look, it's going to be 50 years from now, but it's going to be a disaster. So it's always going to be 50 years from now. Whereas certain things, I think there's things that are driving us all bananas right now that will burn out quickly. So I get into hot topics. So I think the transgender story is going to burn out. I think, and I'll tell you what's going to end it very quickly is that the transgender clinics have been protected by statute of limitations on the things they're doing of about a year. And so they have to keep people who got medical interventions to stay convinced of their move for about a year, and then they're good to go. Their state's going to pass laws saying it's the statute of limitations is 20 years, which means if you do a transgender surgery on a 13-year-old, they have to stay happy with that move till they're 33 before you're safe from a lawsuit. And I think the clinics are going to shut right down completely.
Oh.
And so I think stories like that, transgender women in female sports. I did a poll on Twitter and I said, no ifs, ands, or buts, no waffling. Should biological men be allowed in women's sports? And I got 97.6 no. So the world's already made the decision. For some reason, we just haven't acted. And so I'm militantly against transgender interventions on kids, and I'm militantly against transgender biological male athletes in women's sports. The rest have a ball. They'll be whatever you want. On the other hand, I don't see the United States pulling out of its death spiral, debt its debt spiral. I think we have tough times ahead. I've made the case for a 40-year bear market. I think we could wake up 40 years from now and say, holy shit, my portfolio hasn't really moved, inflation adjusted, because we're that overvalued. So there are things that I don't have a solution to. I don't have a solution to student debt. There's a lot of things that I think are going to haunt us for a long time. So, and this is arguably sort of evidence of end of empire stuff, right? So, they say the Roman Empire ended in 476, but it was a rotting process. There were guys walking around in Roman togas after 476. And there were people in the empire that didn't know the empire had collapsed, and so it takes a long time. It's not like all of Rome just burnt. And so if you want to pay attention to what's going on, you pay attention to the BRICS countries, where BRICS used to be Brazil, Russia, India, China. It was this alliance of kind of our foes at some level. And it's now the BRICS 20, including a bunch of Arab countries with oil. And some people think it's a currency thing. It's not. It's about alliances. These are 20 countries saying, you know what, we're gonna hang out with these other cool kids over here. We're gonna sign up with Russia and China. We're gonna go with them instead. This is a sea change in geopolitics, in my opinion. So I think things are I don't think they're going to be fast. I don't think fast change sometimes self-corrects quickly too. I think we're going to rot our way into some sort of, British Empire sort of thing. The British Empire just kind of slowly but surely, a couple of wars along the way, but they just became underwhelming. So we are at risk of it.
When I listen to Edward Dowd, it sounds like he is thinking bad times are coming, maybe short term, but we're going to see the flowering of something new. Maybe it won't take that long, but you're thinking it's going to take longer, right? It's going to take decades probably of a slow decline.
I think so. If Eddie's talking about, I've known Ed for a long time, well before the COVID story. If you look at markets if they correct spectacularly, the dip buyers show up and they come back. The way you really correct the market. So if I was about 150% overvalued, and that's a 60-70% correction. That means it's got to go down 60 or 70% and not come back. And the way you do that is you knock the person down, and they get up, they say, I'm a dip buyer, and then you knock them down again, and they get up, they say, I'm a long-term holder, and then you knock them down again. And pretty soon they're just down. This week was a historic moment. The Japanese Nikkei hit all-time highs this week after 35 years. So the Nikkei got way overvalued, and 35 years later, we finally, without correcting for inflation, are back to where they were 35 years ago. And it's not like Japan was some third world country. Back when the Nikkei was at its apex, they had 14 of the 20 biggest companies in the world. And the idea, you say, well, why would you invest in the Nikkei? They go, well, that's where everything is. That's where everything. And as Buffett said, some like 12 of the 20 biggest companies in the world are in the United States now. And he said, 40 years from now, they won't be. And so.
Have the Bitcoin people gotten to you at all yet, or still no?
Well, they haven't gotten me to buy it. They've certainly worn my podcasting down to a bloody stump. I've done many, many podcasts with some of the most elite Bitcoiners on the planet. And there's just a host of reasons why I'm not interested in Bitcoin. It's not a total disbelief in Bitcoin. It's just a game. If someone says, look, you could buy, call options on this company, I wouldn't do that either. Right? There's things I just don't do. And Bitcoin happens to have some of the criteria required for me to not do it.
Okay, fair enough. Any other points you'd like to make before we go ahead and finish this one off?
Well, fight the authoritarianism. My biggest fear. I did a podcast this morning, a radio interview actually, and she said, what bothers you the most? I said, the weaponization of the DOJ, yeah. When you start taking out your political opponents with the justice system, I don't care how much you hate the guy. And it's conceivable someone did something so bad that you simply have to prosecute him, right? No one's above the law, but everyone in Washington D.C. is above the law, so it has to be a very high elevation, the bar in D.C. to actually prosecute someone is very high, and I have no problem understanding why people hate Trump. I do have trouble understanding why they can't see past their hatred of Trump into recognizing that taking him out using the legal system is a horrid Rubicon to be crossed. And they seem to be happy to do it. And I said, well, okay, but don't be surprised if, let's call me a right winger, when my team gets in power, we start doing it to you guys, because that's the game you're playing now. And that's civil war, right? That's a problem. And so I don't see how 2024 goes smoothly. I can't find a path through the elections. The only path I can see is if the Democrats could come up with a legitimately strong candidate. And the only one I could name, they will not take. And so the Democrats are blowing it. They could save us by coming up with a good, strong candidate. People say, okay, fine, I will vote for that person, but they can't.
Do you want to name that one, or you don't want to name that?
Oh, I'd vote for Kennedy. I'd vote for Kennedy. He's got warts. He's got zits. He's got things, but he's anti-war, anti-deficit spending. He got a little stuck in the Palestine-Israel debate, which is an unwinnable debate. So, but no, I vote for Kennedy. I'd have no trouble with that. But they won't take him because they don't want him near the White House.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, I cannot believe that I'm thinking positively about a lot of the things he's said, but he's speaking a lot of common sense, I think, or a lot of truth.
I put about 15 pages. I put together about 15 pages, which I dug in and find out his views. Now, you can't read about his views. You really have to hear him talk about his views. And I went through and did that, said, here are the key topics and here are his views. And ironically, the person reading that is reading about his views, which I told you not to do. But I at least know that I didn't just read about his views. And there's things I don't totally agree with, but I would say that he makes more sense than anyone else to me. And he doesn't have the idiosyncrasies of Trump, which I don't have a problem with what Trump did, but I do understand that he's polarizing. And I would like a break from polarization for a while.
So if you listen to what RFK Jr. says about climate change, if you listen to what he says about it, he sounds way more sane now than he did 5-10 years ago.
Well, yeah. And one of the things that he said is, look, I don't support big government solutions to the problem. And that says it all. That it's over at that point. Say, look, if you think you can make a ton of money with solar panels, then make solar panels or windmills or whatever. I watched a podcast yesterday by a woman from Australia. And Australia has real problems. But she for 7 years, she worked in some organization that involved windmills. And she said the Australian government pays something like $1 million per windmill to be installed. What happens is foreign investors, foreign companies come in and install windmills on farmers' land, which they pay the farmer $12,000. But the contract is written such that once that windmill is up, it is the farmer's responsibility. And as a consequence, if it burns, if it breaks, if it's got to be disposed of, it's the farmer's problem. And so it is just a huge scam. Goes back to the $50 trillion opportunity. And by the way, windmills and solar panels are destabilizing the grids. People don't know that. The grid has an inherent frequency. And it's not, night and day, clouds, non-clouds. It's a frequency. And so when you have some big turbine at Niagara Falls whipping around, that thing whips around at a very steady frequency. And coal-fired power plants, very steady frequency. The solar panels in the windmills don't do that. So according to some analysts, that hooking windmills and solar panels to the grid requires some serious jerry-rigging to not destabilize the grid because of the frequency problem. and that you can only take up to maybe 15% of the grid being fed by these alternative energies before the grid just becomes unstable. And no one's paying attention to that. No one knows where. Did you see the Biden plan to put up 3 million solar panels?
Yeah, I saw that.
3 million solar panels. These are 3 million toxic waste dumps that are promised last 25 years, but maybe 10 or 12, right? And you have to wash and you need water. You know, what happens if a hailstorm shows up? You know, there's just so many reasons why you should not put in 3 million solar panels.
I think I was going to look it up here. Steve Malloy has some just general rule of thumb that if it's green, it's a scam. I can't find the quote right now.
I think that's pretty accurate. I think that's pretty accurate. I would love if they started trying to get at the question of not putting plastic items in plastic packaging. You know, stupid stuff like that. It's like, why don't you, you know, when you need a hacksaw to open the package, maybe there's a better way to package it. So, you know, the great trash heap in the Pacific Ocean strikes me as a human failure. I do think we're running out of resources. I know there's a renewed debate on peak oil, and guys I really think are smart are supporting oil's not a problem. I'm still thinking if we're going 2 miles below the Gulf of Mexico, it sure smells like we're treating it as a problem. And, you know, it's not like Jed Clampett firing his gun into the side of the mountains in some hillbilly town and getting oil. Those days are over. So
I do think that Patrick Moore says that Great Pacific garbage patch, whatever, plastic patch, he doesn't believe in it. It doesn't exist.
I've heard that. I've heard that. And let me just say that in general, if someone tells me we've been lied to, I'm not that shocked. So any story that turns out to be false, I say, well, of course, because they can't stop lying. So I've been chasing the darkest of dark stories. That's the geopolitical effects of global pedophilia rings, and try to get a fact from that one. But I was on a. This is so amazing, actually. I was on a Twitter Spaces last night, and I was just listening. And it had some of the pedo hunters. I call them pedo hunters, like Liz Crocken, who's out there battling like crazy. People who follow the story know her by name, and a couple others who've made documentaries. And then I noticed there's Jacob Chansley. Now he is QAnon shaman from January 6th. Now this plot is thickening like crazy because Jacob Chansley was talking about pedophilia and Satanism like a pro. I'm going, I didn't know Jacob Chansley knew about that stuff. And what I can also tell you is I've seen photos of Jacob Chansley with known Ukrainian operatives. And here he is QAnon shaman. There's something so wrong with the Jacob Chansley story. He gets let out of prison. I'm mad as hell at the Republicans for not releasing all the January 6th tapes. They're going to release them piecemeal for some political reason. I go, are you aware there are people rotting in prison right now? And those tapes might get them out of prison, but you're sitting on them because you want to defeat someone in some political elections. That's to me the morality of that. So that's where I really blame the Republicans on that one.
Do you follow Julie Kelly's work on that a lot or no?
A little bit.
Okay. Yeah.
A little bit. It's a big. January 6th bothers me a lot. It was a bad day, but it wasn't a day that justified 870 years of prison time.
Okay.
We should have walked from it.
How many people are still in prison right now from January 6th?
I don't know the numbers, but the prison sentences totaled 870, and they're arresting more people now. They just arrested a journalist. It doesn't smell right to me, right? That sounds very Stalin, Lenin, right?
Yeah, or Banana Republic or whatever. But
yeah. And when they talked about it, they said, we're now going to go after people in the outer rings where they actually crossed some boundary, but didn't go in the building. And I go, how do you do that? So I think people who think that that's okay have just lost their way. Now, maybe they're smart people, maybe they're just morons, but somehow they've lost their way, and they've not recognized that when you support that kind of behavior, it doesn't matter which party it's against.
Right.
It will turn on you very hard. And it's like the famous Niemöller quote where, it said they came for this so-and-so and I didn't speak up because I wasn't one of them. And then when they came for me, there was no one left, right? It's you really should support the basic principles of what we used to think we were. I'm not sure we ever were, but we used to think we were that. We used to try to be that, I think, and we seem to have lost our way.
Okay, my last question here is, can you point us to any other people's work that you think that we should take a look at? Maybe Whitney Webb, you're a fan of her. Anybody else we should be listening to?
Well, there's an economist on Twitter named Peter St. Ange who's very, very good, and you should interview him. Who to watch? Always Thomas Sowell. I don't know. Get on Twitter, start reading stuff, find the news, subscribe to Zero Hedge. I know there's people who think Zero Hedge is garbage. I happen to think it's the best site on the internet. And so you have to bring a filter. You can't just take it hook, line, and sinker. I searched my name once on Zero Hedge. I searched it. I'm in there something like 70 times. It's ridiculous.
You've written a bunch of stuff, haven't you, for them or no?
Well, not for them, but it ends up there.
It ends up there.
And stories about me and stuff like that. Yeah.
All right. I will let you go, I think, but thank you so much for doing this. I think a lot of people are really going to enjoy hearing this.